Hello, I'm Achut Nair from Nair's Aviation Ground School. This is the 39th video in a new series of educational and informative aviation videos for the aspiring pilot. Aviation, being a high-risk field, has been marked by watershed moments that highlighted the areas that need improvement throughout the years. Unfortunately, the moments that call into sharp relief the problems with the aviation world are often deadly accidents. And today, we will discuss the deadliest aviation accident in history. This video is about the Tenerife airport disaster. The largest of the four islands that make up the Spanish Canary Islands, Tenerife is a pristine, peaceful tourist destination. Millions of tourists visit the island annually, and it is a popular destination for families with children. Most tourists use air travel to access the island, and in 1977, Tenerife was serviced by Los Radios Airport. To understand what happened at Tenerife, we first need to be aware of what was going on the nearby Gran Canaria Airport. At 1:15 p.m. on March 27, 1977, a bomb was planted by the Movement for the Independence and Autonomy of the Canaries Archipelago. Exploded in a flower shop on the terminal concourse. 10 minutes warning was given to the airport authorities, who started to evacuate the building. Despite that, the inside of the building was damaged and 8 people were injured, one seriously. A later telephone call claimed the responsibility for the explosion and hinted that the second bomb had been planted somewhere in the terminal building. The airport was closed and searched, necessitating the diversion of several incoming flights, including a number of large aircraft on long international flights to Los Rodeos Airport, later named Tenerife North Airport, on the nearby island of Tenerife. The resulting runway congestion on the small regional airport would play a major factor in the subsequent disaster. There were 2 airplanes involved in the accident, Pan Am Flight 1736 and KLM Flight 4805. Pan Am Flight 1736 had originated in Los Angeles International Airport, with an intermediate stop at New York's JFK Airport. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-121 model, registration number N736PA, named Clipper Victor. KLM Flight 4805 was a charter flight for Holland International Travel Group and had arrived from Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-602B, registration PHBUF, named Rhine. The KLM aircraft had 248 people on board, 234 passengers and 14 crew members. The Pan Am flight had 396 people on board, 380 of those were passengers and 16 crew members. Both aircraft were piloted by experienced aviators, both of whom had thousands of hours flying commercial aircraft. Both flights had been routine until they approached the islands. The threat at Gran Canaria Airport forced a diversion of airplanes to other airports in the vicinity. All traffic from Gran Canaria, including the 5 large airliners, had been diverted to Los Rodeos, a regional airport that was not able to easily accommodate them. The airport had only one runway and one major taxiway parallel to it, with 4 short taxiways connecting the two. While waiting for Gran Canaria Airport to reopen, the diverted aircraft took up so much space that they were parked on the long taxiway, meaning that it could not be used for taxiing. Instead, departing aircraft had to taxi along the runway to the positions themselves for takeoff, a procedure known as a bag taxi or a backtrack. After the threat at Gran Canaria had been contained, authorities reopened the airport. The Pan Am aircraft was ready to depart from Tenerife, but the KLM airplane and a refueling vehicle obstructed its access to the runway. The Pan Am aircraft was unable to maneuver around the fueling KLM, reach the runway, and depart due to a lack of safe clearance. The KLM aircraft was further delayed due to missing passengers and because of the time required for refueling. After taking on fuel, the KLM was ready to depart. The tower instructed the KLM to taxi down the entire length of the runway and then make a 180-degree turn to get into the takeoff position. While the KLM was back taxiing on the runway, the controller asked the flight crew to report when it was ready to copy the ATC clearance. Because the flight crew was performing the checklist, copying this clearance was postponed until the aircraft was in takeoff position on runway 30. Shortly afterwards, the Pan Am was instructed to follow the KLM down the same runway, exit it by taking the third exit on their left, and then use the parallel taxiway. Initially, the crew was unclear as to whether the controller had told them to take the first or third exit. The crew asked for clarification, and the controller responded emphatically by replying, "The third one, sir. 1, 2, 3, third one." The crew began the taxi and proceeded to identify the unmarked taxiways using an airport diagram as they reached them. The crew successfully identified the first two taxiways, but their discussion in the cockpit never indicated that they had sighted the third taxiway, which they had been instructed to use. There were no markings or signs to identify the runway exits, and they were in conditions of poor visibility. The Pan Am crew appeared to remain unsure of their position on the runway until the collision, which occurred near the intersection of the fourth taxiway. The angle of the third taxiway would have required the plane to perform a 148-degree turn, which would have led it back towards the still crowded main apron of the taxiway. At the end of C3, or the third exit of the taxiway, the Pan Am would have to make another 148-degree turn in order to continue taxiing towards the start of the runway, similar to an inverted letter Z. Taxiway 4 would have required two 35-degree turns. A study carried out by the Airline Pilots Association after the accident concluded that making the second 148-degree turn at the end of the taxiway would have been a practical impossibility. Subsequent performance calculations and taxi tests, with the Boeing 747 turning off an intersection comparable to the third taxiway exit at Tenerife as part of the Dutch investigation, indicated that in all probability the turns could have been made. The official report from Spanish authorities explains that the controller instructed the Pan Am aircraft to use the third taxiway because this was the earliest exit they could take to reach the unobstructed section of the parallel taxiway. The weather and the geography of the island also had an impact on the pilot's situational awareness. Los Rodeos Airport is at 633 meters or 2,077 feet above sea level, which gives rise to cloud behavior that differs from that at many other airports. Clouds at 600 meters above ground level at the nearby coast are at ground level at Los Rodeos. Drifting clouds of different densities cause wildly varying visibilities, from unhindered at one moment to below the minimums the next. The collision took place in a high-density cloud. The Pan Am crew found themselves in poor and rapidly deteriorating visibility almost as soon as they entered the runway. According to the ALPA report, as the Pan Am aircraft taxied to the runway, the visibility was about 500 meters, or 1,600 feet. Shortly after they turned onto the runway, it decreased to less than 100 meters, or 330 feet. Meanwhile, the KLM plane was still in good visibility, but with clouds blowing down the runway towards them. The aircraft completed its 180-degree turn in relatively clear weather and lined up on runway 30. The next cloud was 900 meters down the runway and moving towards the aircraft at about 12 knots. If one thing can really be considered the breaking point of the entire event, it was a deterioration in communication and the lack of clarity, comprehension, and understanding in the messages. Immediately after lining up, the KLM captain advanced the throttles and the aircraft started to move forward. First Officer Meurs advised him that ATC clearance had not yet been given, and Captain Zanton responded, "No, I know that. Go ahead, ask." Meurs then radioed the tower that they were ready for takeoff, and they were waiting for their ATC clearance. The KLM crew then received instructions that specified the route that the aircraft was to follow after takeoff. The instructions used the word takeoff, but did not include an explicit statement saying that they were cleared for takeoff. First Officer Murs read the flight clearance back to the controller, completing the readback with the statement, "We are now at takeoff." Captain Zanton interrupted the co-pilot's readback with the comment, "We're going." The controller, who could not see the runway due to the fog, initially responded with "OK," terminology that is not standard, which reinforced the KLM captain's misinterpretation that they had takeoff clearance. The controller's response of "OK" to the co-pilot's non-standard statement that they were now at takeoff was likely due to his misinterpretation that they were in takeoff position and ready to begin the roll when the takeoff clearance was received, but not in the process of actually taking off. The controller then immediately added, "Stand by for takeoff, I will call you," indicating that he had not intended the clearance to be interpreted as a takeoff clearance. A simultaneous radio call from the Pan Am crew caused mutual interference on the radio frequency, which was audible in the KLM cockpit as a 3-second long shrill sound, also known as a heterodyne. This caused the KLM crew to miss the crucial latter portion of the tower's response. The Pan Am crew's transmission was, "We're still taxiing down the runway, the Clipper 1736. This message was also blocked by the interference and inaudible to the KLM crew. Either message, if heard in the KLM cockpit, would have alerted the crew to the situation and given them time to abort the takeoff attempt. Due to the fog, neither crew was able to see the other airplane on the runway ahead of them. In addition, neither of the aircraft could be seen from the control tower, and the airport was not equipped with ground radar. After the KLM plane had started its takeoff roll, the tower instructed the Pan Am crew to report when runway clear. The Pan Am crew replied, "OK, we'll report when we're clear." On hearing this, the KLM flight engineer expressed his concern about the Pan Am not being clear of the runway by asking the pilots in his own cockpit, "Is he not clear, that Pan American?" Zanton emphatically replied, "Oh yes," and continued with the takeoff. The KLM 747 was within 100 meters of the Pan Am and moving at approximately 140 knots, or close to 160 miles an hour, or 260 kilometers an hour, when it left the ground. Its nose landing gear cleared the Pan Am, but its left side engines, lower fuselage, and main landing gear struck the upper right side of the Pan Am's fuselage, ripping apart the center of the Pan Am jet almost directly above the wing. The right side engines crashed through the Pan Am's upper deck immediately behind the cockpit. The KLM plane remained briefly airborne, but the impact had sheared out the outer left engine, caused significant amounts of shredded materials to be ingested into the inner left engine, and damaged the wings. The plane immediately went into a stall, rolled sharply, and hit the ground approximately 150 meters past the collision, sliding down the runway for a further 300 meters. The full load of fuel, which had caused the earlier delay, ignited immediately into a fireball that could not be subdued for several hours. Both airplanes were destroyed in the collision. All 248 passengers and crew aboard the KLM plane died, as did 335 passengers and crew aboard the Pan Am airplane, primarily due to fire and explosions resulting from the fuel that was spilled and ignited on impact. The other 61 passengers and crew aboard the Pan Am aircraft survived, including the captain, first officer, and flight engineer. A thorough investigation was conducted by the Spanish Aviation Authority, the Commission for the Investigation of Civil Aviation Accidents, or CIA-IAC. The investigation concluded that the fundamental cause of the accident was that Captain Zanton of KLM attempted to take off without clearance. The investigators suggested the reason for this was a desire to leave as soon as possible in order to comply with KLM's duty time restrictions, which went into place earlier that year, and before the weather deteriorated further. Other major factors contributing to the accident were the sudden fog that greatly limited visibility, the control tower and the crews of both airplanes were unable to see one another, interference from simultaneous radio transmissions, the result that it was difficult to hear the message. The following factors were considered contributing but not critical. The use of ambiguous, non-standard phrases by the KLM co-pilot, such as "we're at takeoff," and the Tenerife control tower, such as "okay." The Pan Am aircraft had not left the runway at the third intersection as directed. The airport was forced to accommodate a great number of large aircraft due to rerouting from the terrorist incident, resulting in the disruption of the normal use of the taxiways. Aviation accidents rarely occur due to one single thing. Accidents in aviation are often the result of many factors that are compounded, which then grows more and more dangerous until the accident actually occurs. Recognizing the factors that can lead to an accident can stop accidents from developing further or stop them from even happening completely. An accident of this magnitude was never before seen in the aviation world. In an instant, 583 people were killed. We have talked about the joy and fun of flying, but flying also requires consistency, responsibility, and seriousness. In an aircraft, you must be able to follow the regulations that pertain to that specific circumstance, and never attempt to cut corners or skip steps. Let us hope that the Tenerife airport disaster can inspire a new generation of pilots to be safe, considerate, and responsible in their flying. For more information, please contact us at liftanddrag@gmail.com and visit our website at nyersaviation.webnode.com. Also visit our YouTube channel at Nyers Aviation on YouTube. Thank you, safe flying.